So this is in partnership with the Indigenous Perspectives Society with April Reeve, and I would like to welcome you all here today. And I'm honored to have Eddy Charlie and Kristin Spray here to share their stories. They are also the founders of the Victoria Orange Shirt Day. And I'm just going to play you a 2-minute video. So.
It's Eddy Charlie. My Indian name is Sinimtin. I'm from the Cowichan Nation, and I'm a survivor of the Kuper Island Residential School. As a survivor of residential school myself, I find that Orange Shirt Day is really important because a lot of children were taken away from their homes forcibly when they were very young. So Orange Shirt Day is this one opportunity when everybody can come together to reclaim their identity and their lost traditions. Now, I think you have to look at our spirits much the same way as a river. If you throw something that's no good into the river, it touches everything down along the way. And we've been contaminated by hate, pain, and aggression. And until we clean up that river, we'll always be stuck in that real bad place. If you want to participate in Orange Shirt Day, you need to listen to the stories of the survivors. I experienced enough pain to last me 3 lifetimes, and it's time for me to release some of that anger, some of that pain, by allowing people to see what's inside here so that they can understand what happened to 150,000 other children. This is why I think Orange Shirt Day is really important, because it gives us an opportunity to talk to people and show them that healing can happen. We're inspiring people to want to be a part of this movement, and not just Indigenous people, but the non-Indigenous community is starting to become aware of what happened to these 150,000 children. And healing will start real slow, but gradually when we start to learn to trust each other again, I think Orange Shirt Day will give us that opportunity to use our voices in an equal way again.
Thank you. So without further ado, I give you to Eddy Charlie and Kristin Spray.
So I'm going to make a decision here. Introduce yourself.
Bojo and Wamadog, Makanawitang Nadijnakas, Curve Lake First Nation, Nindochba. Hello everyone, my name is Makanawitang and I am from Curve Lake First Nation. I moved here to Lekwungen and Wasanish territories 3 years ago to go to Camosun College, where I met Kristin and Eddy, and now I'm working with Victoria Orange Shirt Day as a friend turn. Thank you.
Exquachel CM, Asa Kristin Spray, Tisles and Wasanich, Iasan Quanis Eitla, Tia and Elananak. My name is Kristin Spray, and I want to say how grateful I am to be here today and to gather together with everyone else who chose to also come and listen and join together with open hearts and support and strength from the land. I want to acknowledge the Lekwungen homelands here that we're speaking from, as well as to share that my heritage is as a non-Indigenous, as a settler. My father is German and English and Irish, and my mother is Irish and Scottish. And after attending the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Vancouver, I ended up deciding to go back to school and do the Indigenous Studies program, where I met my friend Eddy Charlie. And we are the co-organizers of the city ceremony, Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters, Shat Shats Manam, Sacred Children. What do you want to introduce?
No,
You, Karen? Okay. Well, I think just we'll carry on from here in terms of a little bit of information about myself.
did she just ask us to introduce herself?
Yeah, we'll have to. So I grew up in the Wasanich homelands, as well as the Lekwungen, and I grew up near Pecals, also known as Mount Doug, in a neighborhood called Gordon Head. And growing up, probably in elementary school and high school, I only knew a handful of First Nations children and teenagers, and each one that I knew was in a non-Indigenous foster home or adopted into non-Indigenous homes. I didn't know what a reserve was. I hadn't heard about reserves, and there's multiple reserves within 15 minutes away in a number of different directions, whether it's Songhees, Esquimalt Nation, Sayout, Pakwachin, Sartlip, Sekum, and more. And so I'm just sharing this as an expression of obviously ignorance and not knowing, and also being in community of majority non-Indigenous and white people that also weren't aware or sharing information regarding the cultures and languages of Indigenous people. In my early 20s, I traveled to India, and it was there while I was in an intercultural school that I first heard about residential schools. And though I had planned on carrying on after my year in India, I felt that I should come home and learn more from the people whose homelands I was living on. And so that's what I did. And I ended up enrolling in some school to train as a healthcare worker, which I've done for years. And I also became a part of the Mustard Seed Food Bank as a volunteer. And that's where I got to know more First Nations people, and a family in which welcomed me into their home. And we've been friends for over 20 years. And I've seen their children grow up and go on to have children. The great grandmother is a residential school survivor. The father also attended residential school and was put into experimental hospitals. So here and there, I'd hear a little bit about residential school, and I knew that it was abusive, but I also recognized it was very difficult for my friends to share about, and it brought up a lot of uncomfortable feelings. So in 2013, I attended the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Vancouver. This is a commission that went all over Canada for 6 years, visiting different cities and towns, and opening up a space for people who had attended residential school to come and share their stories of what happened to them. It was also welcome to children and grandchildren of survivors to share. I also witnessed priests and nuns attending, as well as RCMP officers, airplane pilots, people who had participated in taking children away from their homes. It was at this time that I heard a number of stories that were devastating. They were cruel and intentionally destructive to Indigenous people's identities, and more than that. And after that, I decided I needed to put some of my own personal life on hold, the vocation I was pursuing, and I wanted to learn more from Indigenous people. So I started to research different school programs run by Indigenous people, and I found the one at Camosun College called the Indigenous Studies program, and entered in 2014. And in that program is where I met Eddy Charlie. And in our first week of school, we were asked by our instructor what it was we hoped for throughout the next 2 or 3 years in this program. And I felt a lot of guilt after hearing stories of immense abuse, but not only that, also about how land has been taken from Indigenous people all over Canada, and really even how Canada has formed has been through taking land and lives and children. And so I ended up sharing that I'd like a place of belonging. And when it came to Eddy's turn, he stood up and he shared his name, he shared his grandparents' names, and he said that there was wisdom that his grandfather had, and that is that there's room in the circle for everyone. And I'm grateful to this day for that openness and the invitation to get to know Eddy, as well as many of my classmates in that program. It was September, and on September 30th, 2014 was Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters. It's the personal story of Phyllis Webstad, Dog Creek Nation in Williams Lake. She shares that her shiny orange shirt was taken on her first day of residential school, and it was never given back to her. Her grandmother had bought it for her first day of school, and she witnessed a lot of awful things while there, and throughout her life was triggered by this color orange and remembering what had happened to her and feeling like she didn't matter. And later on, when she started her healing journey in her 40s, she was encouraged to find a way to bring something good to light. And so she and a friend decided to hold a ceremony called Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters, honoring residential school survivors and those who didn't survive. So our classmates and I gathered anything orange we could find. It was not a very popular color, and we had opportunity to share in a number of classes. And Eddy is a residential school survivor of Kuper Island Residential School. And so on that day, he was able to share some of his story to some people who had never even heard about residential school. Looking around the campus of over 18,000 people, like I said, there's only a handful of us that were wearing orange, and there's so many people who had never heard about residential school or really known the deeper undertones of the systematic ways of assimilation and abuse. And so after that day, it felt like it was going to be a long time before we'd have an opportunity to talk about this, which is really important. So I asked Eddy if he would consider working together to raise awareness about his residential school experience and hundreds of thousands of other children. And he didn't answer me. And I knew it was really important, and I knew we had just met as well. And so I just kept thinking about it, and a few months went by, and I asked him again, and still he didn't answer. And this happened another couple times. Well, a year had passed, and we came back from a summer off, and it was 2015. And first week of school, I asked Eddy if he would consider working together and to have a ceremony or raise awareness about Orange Shirt Day and residential school survivors. And to my surprise, he said yes. And we asked the college, the president of Camosun College, Sherry Bell, as well as the head of the Indigenous department, Janice Simcoe, if we could work together to have a ceremony for the 30th, and they agreed. So within 2.5 weeks, we organized an important ceremony, and we had some people from community come to the campus as well, some politicians, as well as artists and students. And we were pretty grateful. Camosun let us know that they mandated this in their annual calendar, and they've had an Orange Shirt Day ceremony ever since. So Eddy and I again thought, well, it's going to be another year before we have a ceremony like this, and it just feels so important to talk about. We started reaching out to elementary schools, high schools, when we were approached by anyone to come and share in different classrooms at Camosun, at UVic, we would do so. We've gone to kids' homes for their book reports. We've been invited to speak at youth at risk camps from the Victoria Police Department. We've spoken at the legislature a number of times for various nonpartisan workers with the Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation through the government, hospital organizations. We just wanted to build relationship within the community to make room and space for a safe conversation and to grow together. Eddy got to know the mayor of our city, and her name is Lisa Helps. And Eddy asked if we could make a proclamation to make it an official day for our city, to have Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters. And she agreed and said, if you write a proclamation, then we'll make it happen. And so Eddy looked up what a proclamation was and how to go about doing so, and he wrote a proclamation. And in 2016, the mayor came to Camosun College on September 30th and presented us with a proclamation for Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters for the whole city. And soon after that, we were graduating, so we asked the mayor if we could hold city ceremony, and she said yes. And from that day forward, we started reaching out to various businesses like Big Wheel Burger, Cafe Fantastico, Discovery Coffee, Victory Barber and Brand, Fernwood Yoga Den, Deli. Really, we're interested in relationships with everyone, and for there to be space for everyone to know more and to stand together. And selling these T-shirts helps us to raise money for our ceremonies, and these businesses have been a big part of that, as well as working with Bridges Society for Women when we first started out. And I want to tell you a little something about this design. It's a design we print every year, and it was created by a friend and classmate, Bear Horn of Cowichan Nation. And the bear is to help us find a good path, and the eagle is to help us find a vision for hope and for the future. And the hummingbirds, they help us body, mind, and spirit, and they're messengers. And the flowers help all these elements come together. And so this is hopefully a story of hope and possibilities. And Eddy and I are really happy to be here with you and enter into a space where we can all learn and know more through this experience that Eddy's going to share with you. Hajkasiyam.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eddy Charlie. I'm from the Cowichan Nation. And I want to take the time to acknowledge where we are today, too. We're on lands that the people of Lekwungen call home, and they have called this home for thousands of years. And I like to say Hajkasiyam to people of Lekwungen, and I raise my hand to show my gratitude and appreciation for their strength and resiliency and courage. I also want to acknowledge that on these lands, there are many survivors of our residential schools still alive today. And I'd like to raise my hand to them for being able to walk on land with humble heart and still being able to be gentle despite the experiences of genocide that I experienced through residential school. Residential school is something that we don't talk about very often in the community, and it's something that we need everybody in Canada to hear. It's a story of assimilation and genocide that happened across Canada for 150 years. And today we're just now beginning to have true open conversations about it. And to do that, we share that through an event called Orange Shirt Day. And Kristin and I are really happy and proud to be a part of that process of reclaiming our identity and who we are as people. I went to residential school when I was 4.5 years old, and the school I went to was Kuper Island. Now, when you think about school, you think it's about a place where children are happy, running around, learning how to do the ABCs, how to count, and learn about other countries and how to put words together to make a complete sentence. That's the reality that most people assume when they hear the word school. But for many residential school survivors, that was not the case. When Orange Shirt Day was created, it was created to help people understand what residential school did to 150,000 children. And there were 139 residential schools from British Columbia to New Brunswick. And they say that there were 150,000 children that were taken away from their home. But I want to see that's an estimate. Nobody knows exactly how many children were taken away from their home. And I don't think they'll ever know for sure because there were no records kept. And in these residential schools, some 4,000 children died. And some people say that it could be as high as 6,000 or more. There are an estimated 2,000 children that are unaccounted for. And again, just saying that the 2,000 children unaccounted for could be even higher. Because I've heard stories from other survivors and their families where mothers are still waiting for their children to come home or waiting for clarification about where their children are. I want everybody to understand that residential schools forcibly removed us, took us away from our homes against our will, and mothers and fathers were not able to stop it from happening. And many of the parents who did not want their children to go to residential school were threatened with arrest or given a warning that they may never ever see their children again if their children were not taken to the residential school. So I just want you to know that. And that's 150,000 children that were forced to go to these schools. Now, in most of the schools, especially the one I went to, all the boys and girls were separated. And the girls lived on one side of the school and the boys on the other side. And for many of the survivors of residential school, they were in the school for 2 years to 10 years. So they were there from 4 years old to 14 or 16. And I heard of stories where some of them that stayed there longer. So I want that number to stay with you for a little while because it's going to mean something as I tell my story to you. Now, the school I went to was called Kuper Island, and it was a mile and a half from Chemainus, BC. So we're isolated on the island, away from our parents, our family, and our community. And the only people that we had contact with were other survivors of residential school, priests, oblate brothers, nuns, and dorm supervisors and teachers. So the first day that all the children were taken to the school, they had their hair cut off, their clothes removed from them, and we had like not a health checkup, but they checked our head for lice and looked in our ear and checked our eyes and our mouth, and then cut all our hair off, and then we all had pretty much the same clothes given to us. So it looked like a prison rather than a school. And now that we rarely ever went to class, all that time that I was there, I only remember sitting in class like 1 hour a day and sometimes 3 hours a week. Most of the time we were either outside working or cleaning up around the school, or spending 2 or 3 hours in a church, either studying about Jesus and the Bible, or saying bad things about ourselves. I mean, the priests were always saying things like, your culture is evil, they teach you bad things, and you need to stop practicing some of these demonic traditions. And when you go through something like that every day for 2 years to 10 years, it starts to have an effect on who you think you are and what you think about your culture and your traditions. And for many, a lot of us started to hate who we actually were. But that wasn't what made us hate who we were the most. Many of the children that were removed from their home experienced starvation, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and the worst of it, sex abuse. Now, the physical abuse was something that happened to you if you're in the school and you speak in your own language, or if you're practicing culture and tradition. Now, these are the three things that they target the most: was your culture, your traditions, and your language. Because Duncan Campbell Scott said, we have an Indian problem here and they wanted to get rid of it. And the best way to get rid of it was by removing our identity. And our identity consisted of our language and culture and tradition. And so every time we were caught speaking our language, practicing our culture or tradition, they beat us, and quite badly, I should say, because many of the priests and dorm supervisors carried a wooden ruler with them wherever they went, and they used it quite gleefully. And I want to share a little story to you about my grandparents. Now, my grandparents had a really strong connection to the land, and they walked among land, they touched the water and the trees, sat on the earth, and communicated with the earth a lot. And they put a lot of value in the spiritual belief in their cultural and Indigenous identity. And because of this, they sang a lot of songs that I made up whenever they were walking on the lands. And I often used to sneak out the back and hide under the porch and watch and listen to my parents as they sang songs to each other whenever they were doing chores. My grandmother used to sit there and knit, and my grandfather would be cutting wood or whatever, but they always sang songs to each other back and forth. Every time they sang the songs to each other, I could see with my eyes the amount of love, the amount of respect and care that they had for each other. And because of that secret relationship that I had, I grew to love songs myself. So when I went to residential school, I took that love for singing with me. And one day when I was walking from the classrooms to living units, all of a sudden I started singing songs that I remember my grandfather liking a lot. And then all of a sudden I felt like a bang in the back of my head, and I ended up on the ground. And when I turned over, I looked up, and there was a priest glaring down at me, and he was saying, "You will not be needing that here anymore." And he hit me with a belt and told me to go. So I went to my living unit. But I looked at my back leader and saw where he hit me, and there were bruises and welts there. And that's how serious they were about preventing us from practicing our culture, tradition, or speaking our languages. And I've seen many other children that were beaten for speaking their language or singing songs that they knew from their culture. Now, when you put 211 children, that's the amount of children that were in the school the same year as me. When you put them together and they experience the same kind of behavior for like 2 years or longer, it's going to have an impact on them when they go back home to their community. And we sort of taught our own brothers and sisters who didn't go to residential school, or the younger generation, how to hate their own culture and tradition too. And we brought a lot of anger home with us. Well, seriously, the most damaging aspect of residential school was the amount of sex abuse that was happening in the residential school, and it was bad. It was really, really bad. And this is not just a story, and it's not just a story that we want to share with anybody. We don't want people to know about this. It's been something that's been hidden for a long, long time. And it's not because we fear what residential school did to us. It's because we're so ashamed that some of this stuff happened to us. Now, I was only 4.5 when I got to the residential school, and I had only been there for a month and a half, and then I started to experience my first case of sexual abuse from some of the priests and the dorm supervisor. Every time I sang songs or spoke my language of my grandparents, they beat me up, but they also saw how weak I was by not resisting or fighting back. And they started to take advantage of that, and they manipulated me and many other children same age or size as me. And they just started to take me up to this room on the 3rd floor in the residential school that was away from the dorms and all the other rooms. And they started sexually touching me and forcing me to sexually touch them. And that started to happen on a daily basis over the next month and a half. And then on Monday, it got worse. They actually started raping me. And I know they were doing that to other children because the things that they were doing to me, the behavior that they exhibited, they started to do that to other children too, until one day they just started taking all the children to this little room where we sat, and they sort of like a communion, like a living room, and they would just call a number out, and these numbers that were given to us the day we entered the residential school, and whenever they called your number out, it was always a fearsome moment, and you always sat there just like, don't let it be me, don't let it be me. And you see all the other children looking down at the ground, scared, because they all knew what was going to happen. Everybody knew what the third floor was. We talked about it because we were too ashamed to tell people who we were sitting with in the classroom, people who we were eating with, people who were sharing a dorm with us, that the priests and the dorm supervisors were doing bad things to us. Now, when you have 211 children that are experiencing this kind of abuse for 2 years to 10 years, and it's not just the physical abuse and emotional abuse and sex abuse, but, and there's another factor, some of the other students started to abuse us in the same way that they were abused, especially the older ones, the children 10 years and older. They started to roam around in the hallways in the school and started to abuse the other younger children too. Now, when you put 211 children together and they start to experience that kind of abuse, especially not being able to share what was happening to them, to their family, or to speak about it with anybody, you have a nightmare that's building up in here, a nightmare that you have to live with every day. And that nightmare creates a lot of anger, frustration, and hatred, especially hatred. And for me, I had a lot of hatred. I hated my parents, I hated my grandparents for letting this happen to me, for allowing them to let the residential school take me away from my home. And I never ever forgave my parents for what happened to me as a child. How do you feel? I'm asking you, how would you feel as a parent, a grandparent, to watch your children be taken away knowing that something bad's going to happen to them and you're not able to stop it? That was always on my thoughts throughout my life from the age 7 to where I am today. I asked myself, why the hell didn't my dad and my mom and my grandparents come and save me? And to this day, I've hated them. I hated them with such fierceness that it was not understandable. And it wasn't until 5 years ago or 6 years ago when me and Kristin started working on Victoria Orange Shirt Day that I began to realize that my parents didn't have a choice. They had to let me go or they would never see me again. And I tried to find a way to forgive them for that. Tried to find a way to forgive my grandparent. But when you're 4.5 years old and somebody rapes you for 2 years, it becomes really hard to find forgiveness. It's really hard to be gentle and say kind and nice things about your parents or your grandparents. Now, I carried that with me for a long time. And because of all that pain and anger that I had right here, I needed to find a way to cope with all that pain and anger. And I found my answer to that in the form of alcohol. And I became an alcoholic when I was fairly young. I was only 9 years old when I first tasted alcohol, because I woke up one day and I was hungry and I went to the fridge and I could hear my parents in the living room partying with other friends. And I went to look in the fridge for something to eat and then found nothing but some tiny little brown bottles, lots. And I looked around for food, but I couldn't find anything. So I went back and looked at the bottle that I found in the fridge. And I opened one and took a drink. I didn't like the taste at all, but I was really hungry. And so I drank 3 beers, and that was enough to get me real drunk. And I passed out under the table. And I still remember that day. And I still remember that physical place that alcohol brought me to, and that emotional state that it gave me. That emotional state I'm talking about is that one moment, that one time, that one place where I can forget about that crying that I heard inside my head. And that crying inside my head is every single residential school survivor that experienced the same thing as me. They were crying inside my head. And I carried that with me, and I still carry it today. And that alcohol gave me that escape away from that crying. And I was grateful for it. So by the time I was 11, I became an alcoholic. And I would do anything and everything to get my hands on alcohol. I used to go around in the neighborhood and steal pop bottles, pop cans from people's yards and then take them into, have them exchange for cash. And then I would get beer and then go in the forest behind my grandparents, drink and pass out and feel like I could forget about all that bad stuff that happened to me at Kuper Island. But every day that I drank, that screaming became louder and louder in my head, and it still is there today. And I'm not the only one that has that alcohol problem. Many people in my community have tried to find ways to forget about their experience of residential school, or if it's not the experience of residential school, it's about us, what we brought back home from us. I mean, to our communities. When we went to residential school and they finally let us go home, we took a lot of anger, a lot of aggression to our community, and we preyed on our own people. We beat up our own families, we beat up our own friends, we beat up our own relatives, and frustration and anger because what happened to us in residential school. Now, people outside our community, they always look at us and they say, what is wrong with these people? Why are they like that? Why did they behave like that? Why did they do stuff like that? Now I'm telling you this story, sharing this story, so you have a chance, a time to know and understand why my people are the way they are, why we do things the way we do them. If you go in one community, any community, you will see the behavior pattern that we brought home to our community. You see, my community, they're not ashamed to hit their children in the public. They're very abusive to their children, and they don't feed them right. And a lot of them abuse alcohol, much the same way I did all my life. And because at residential school, they don't have parenting skills, and they don't know how to express love. They don't know how to express care. And it's not because they don't want to. It's because we were trained to be the way we are from residential school. Now, people always say that what residential school amount to is cultural genocide, and I happen to agree with that assessment because I'm Cowichan. I love my people. I love my culture, and I miss it. But at the same time, a lot of my heart, my spirit won't let it come back to me. I don't remember any of the songs that my parents taught me. I don't remember a lot of the teaching that my grandfather used to teach me every day. And I think residential school did a real good job of taking away my identity. And for me and Kristin to be doing the work that we do about creating awareness about what residential school did to 150,000 children, it gives me that opportunity to sort of silently apologize to my community for the way I behaved as a survivor of residential school by visiting my anger and my aggression on the community and giving other survivors of residential school that opportunity to also recognize that something happened to us that made us change into good, loving, caring people, into the bad monsters that came back home from residential school. Now, people talk about this word reconciliation all the time. And reconciliation can be a good word for some people, but for a residential school survivor, we have to see it as a bad word. And we think that it puts us in a bad place and makes us feel like everything about reconciliation is about pointing fingers at what residential school created and made us out to be. And it shouldn't be, because the government and the churches took us away from our home and changed us. We did not ask for that change. We did not give them permission to take us away from our home and change us. And today we're still fighting to understand that. And I think Orange Day is that one biggest step for any survivor of residential school to sit down and acknowledge that residential school changed me and made me into a bad person. And I think when that begins to happen on a bigger scale, I think real healing can happen. We still have a long way to go. When people talk about healing as a nation, I think we got more than 7 generations of conversations with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I don't think I'll be alive when the third stage of healing begins to happen. I don't think my children or my grandchildren will be alive when the fourth stage of healing begins to happen. But today, what we're doing by having these conversations and creating that safe place for people to sit down and talk about what happened to these 150,000 children of residential school, it opens up a new world, a new place where we can all feel safe and protected to share our stories about what residential school did to us as people. And we want everybody to understand that we know harms happened to us, and we know those harms changed us into people that we were not meant to be. So now when I mentioned to you earlier, I wanted you to think about the number 211. I asked you to think about the number 211 because many of those people that went to residential school with me at the same time were in that school for 10 years. And so for 10 years, people experienced physical abuse, separation from their family, and starvation, physical abuse, and sex abuse. Now, when you experience that a whole bunch of times, it makes reconciliation seem like impossible, because how do you fix a scar that big when a child is abused repeatedly over a number of times? I'm surprised by my ability to be able to talk about what happened to me and tell people that happened to 150,000 other children too. I want you to think about that. 150,000 children for 10 years, abused again, and again, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. The mums and the grandparents not going to be able to do anything about it. Think about what that's going to do to a child's behavior patterns when he's allowed to finally go back home. And it's really important that people know this story. I acknowledge that as a residential school survivor, I hurt many people in my life. I took my anger and my aggression with me, and I allowed people to know that residential school hurt me, and it changed me. Now, I've been sober for 25 years now, and I'm seeing for the first time what it was like for me to live in that world. And I come to realization that the work that me and Kristin do is really important. I do not want my children, my grandchildren, or their grandchildren to experience the same amount of pain that I have in my lifetime. And I hope that I can continue to work with Kristin with this work about creating awareness about the effects of residential school and what it did to Indigenous communities across Canada, so that cycle of trauma and intergenerational trauma ends right here with where the path that I'm walking today, so that every other path that comes up behind me has at least moderate cases of people learning how to be gentle with each other. Now, I told you that we forgot how to love and care for our family because of what residential school did to us. Now, I'd like to be able to have an opportunity in my lifetime before I die to say, I love you to somebody in my family. I've never had that experience yet. And the first time I ever experienced that was when I watched Kristin interact with her family. And I was shocked to see the expressions of open love, care, and respect that Kristin's family had for each other. And to have Kristin's sister and brother hug me, it blew me away. It shocked me because I'd never seen that in my own house. I never seen my brothers or sisters express love or gratitude toward each other. And I want my children and grandchildren to be able to experience that. So I'm really grateful to be able to work with Kristin and create awareness about the effects of residential school. And I noticed that a lot of your foster parents all over from Victoria all the way up to Sioux and Port Hardy, and some even my hometown, Duncan. And I just want to express gratitude to you for taking the time to allow us to come to your circle and share the story about residential school. It's a really emotional and very heavy story, and I'm sure it's not something anybody is used to. And I also want to acknowledge that in our history, there are no books written in history in school, colleges, or university about residential school. So I want to encourage you as foster parents, social workers, teachers, and learners to take the time and sit with other residential school survivors and hear their stories, because not all stories of residential school are the same, and not all people heal the same way. So the more you hear stories, the more you share stories, the more, the bigger the chance of finding healing ways will happen. And so me and Kristin are really grateful to be allowed to share with you. And I raise my hands to you for having the courage to hear what me and Kristin had to share. And we hope that what you experienced today by hearing a story, that you take something with you that allows you to grow and to understand the spirituality about the people from these lands and what many of them missed and what many of them are still missing today. And I hope that whatever you take back with you gives the Indigenous community an opportunity to try find that thing that was stolen from them when they were children. I'm still in that state of healing where I can talk, but when I go home, I know I'll cry. And I'll think about what happened to me as a child, and I'll be angry all over again. But the only thing that keeps me going is hope that whatever happened to me, all that pain and that trauma, stops on the path that I'm on right now and allows my children and my grandchildren to know what it means to be humble, gentle, and caring people. And we don't see enough of that on our lands today. I also want to say that there are only 77,000 residential school survivors among us today. And you really need to sit down and hear their stories, because if the last residential school survivor dies, it will be as if residential school didn't happen. So we must continue to share this story. We must continue to acknowledge that residential school did something bad to us. And today we're just on the baby steps of healing. And the baby steps are just like basic words of what happened to us. So I want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time to hear us, and we will leave some pamphlets here with what's her name? Deanne. And they have information about me and Kristin. They have the story of the design on her, and on the bottom there's Gmail and a website for information about us. And they also have a picture in case you want to know what we look like. So we want to say thank you, and we are really grateful. And Kristin was going to tell you where we are, the lands that we're on today.
It is Matulia.
It's the indigenous name for Victoria.
Victoria. Mm-hmm.
So we just wanted to acknowledge that, so you know where we are today. Mm-hmm. And we really wish to express gratitude to what's this place called?
Foster Parent Society Support Services Society.
Foster Parent Support Services Society.
Yeah.
Yes. We wish to express our gratitude to that society for reaching out to us and asking us to come here and be a part of your circle. And we hope also that the people that heard us, as well as the society, take something from what we shared with you today into your heart, your spirit, and into your own circle, and that you continue to share what you learned today about the effects of residential school, because some of the effects of residential school is still happening all over across Canada. Children are committing suicide at high rates because of intergenerational trauma, because they don't understand why their parents are being so abusive to them and not putting food on the table and not doing what I said, expressing love to them. Children have never ever grown up having their parents say, I love you. And so they grow up most of their life dysfunctional. And we want people to understand that. And the effects of alcoholism and drug addiction is gone pretty high in our community because of residential school. People are dropping out of school before they reach grade 7. Children are being taken away from their homes at such a high rate and put into foster homes or being adopted. And the amount of children that are taken away from their homes and put into foster homes or up for adoption will soon be higher than the amount of children that were taken away from their homes and placed in a residential school. And we could go on all day about the effects of residential school, but we just want you to understand just the basics of what residential school actually did to us. And we hope that you will take something with you and share it with your own circles, your own friends and your family. And we just wanted to say thank you again. So, Siam, thank you for taking the time to hear us. And thank you, Deanne, for asking us to come here.
Eddy,
I just want to say thank you to Eddy for sharing your story. It must have been very hard, and I appreciate that. And we will take this time to share and spread the story because it's important. It's a really important one to share.
Who's talking?
That's Deanne.
Oh,
it's Deanne. Thank you, Deanne. I hope everyone can hear me, and I just want to share that I know this is a really emotional experience, and that we always want there to be room for people to do whatever they need to do for their emotions, and also an opportunity if people want to have anything they would like to say, a comment or a question, that we welcome that. We appreciate hearing from people, as well as an opportunity for any questions to be asked, that knowledge can come forward. Eddy has a lot of experience, including foster care, being in foster care himself. And so he's a really great person with a big heart who would love to answer your questions if you have any.
Aichka, Eddy and Kristin, your story is emotional. Eddy, your story rings true through my heart and soul. And I hold my hands up to you for sharing your story. And it's so important for all of us as foster parents to understand the history of Indigenous people. So once again, Aichka, thank you.
Sorry, we only have one camera on here. I'm looking at everybody in the computer, and I feel like I just become the host to Hollywood squares when I look at all the people in the
I have a question. I was just wondering, Eddy, if you're in touch with any of the other children that you went to school with.
Thank you. That's a really good question. As I mentioned, the day they took me away from my home, 211 children went to the same residential school as me. And about 10 years ago, I started researching and trying to find as many of the survivors as I could find. And 10 years ago, there were 11 survivors still alive today. And that would put them at the same age as me, around 57 or 58 years old. So that's very young. And the majority of them are gone. Many of them died through suicide, alcohol poisoning, or drug overdose. So it demonstrates here the effects that residential school had on many of the children who went to residential school. They carried that trauma with them for a real long time, and they had no way to cope with it. So a lot of students, rather than having to face continued scrutiny for their behavior and for the amount of pain that they were carrying, chose suicide rather than living with all that pain. Now, it's 50 years later, and there are currently only 5 students left alive from the same year I went to Kuper Island. And 3 of them are from my own house, me, my older sister, and my older brother, and 2 students that recognized me from the school I went to in the community. So I'm really shocked to see that only 5 of the children I went to school with are still alive today. And many of the people I went to residential school with me are still experiencing trauma, and they're still abusing alcohol quite badly. And alcoholism in my family is quite bad, and there's still so much violence. So that's a really good question. And I hope that what we're doing here today gives people an opportunity to allow a little bit of healing, not just for Indigenous people who experience residential school, but what we did when we returned to our home communities. We had a deep impact on non-Indigenous communities by bringing our violence to our community, and it helped bring that huge rise to racism in our community because of the way Indigenous people were behaving in the community. And I hope that the work that we do helps to change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a comment or would like to share something?
No.
I have another question though. Deanne, did your parents attend a residential school?
Did your parents attend a residential school?
Yes, both my grandparents and my parents attended residential school.
Wow.
And I actually did not know that my mother went to residential school. Oh, I did. I didn't know which residential school she went to until she passed away a couple of years ago. I went to her funeral, and I didn't want to be there at all. I don't like funerals at all. I went anyhow, and I started meeting family that I never ever met. And I sat down with nephews and nieces that I never knew existed. And people start telling me stories about my mother. And then said that she went to the Kuper Island Residential School, the same school that I went to. And so I began to understand why she was the way she was too. She was an alcoholic that was like drunk 5-6 times a week and didn't seem to care about anybody. But underneath her, all that, I began to see that she was carrying the same amount of trauma that I was carrying here. And so for the first time in my life, I got to know my mother. And I began to see why my brothers and sisters were crying at the funeral. I got to the funeral and they were sobbing. And I was like, I wondered what that was all about. And today I have regret in my heart for never getting to know my mother and never getting to know that she went to residential school, just like my father and my grandparents and many of my uncles and aunts. So thank you for asking me about that, about my parents being residential school survivors themselves. And I just want to say something about my father. He's in his 80s now, and he's never, ever, ever once talked about his residential school experience. So we think that the work that we do is going to give people like him an opportunity to see what we're doing and maybe give other people the courage to share their own stories.
Thank you. I do have another question from somebody from the chat. They would be interested in your fostering experience. And I'm thinking that's as a child in care.
Oh, wow. How did you know about that? I actually, when I came home from residential school, I was messed up, literally messed up. And I became so dysfunctional the moment that I managed to, let's say, escape from residential school. And I started drinking a lot and getting in trouble a lot. And I hated people in positions of authority. And so I fought a lot of people that I assumed were people in positions of authority. And they started saying that there was something seriously wrong with me. And my father agreed with them. He couldn't control me. And he's saying that he's a bad person. And so by the time I was 9, I started going through the foster care system. And first they placed me in a foster home in Nanaimo. And I ran away from home and I hitchhiked to Duncan. So they sent me to a foster home in Victoria. And again, I ran away from foster home and hitchhiked back to Duncan. So they asked my parents if they can send me to a foster home further away. And they sent me to a foster home in Camosun area. And again, I ran away from home and hitchhiked back and made it back home each time they send me to foster home. Now, I did not have enjoyable experience being in a foster home. Back in the 70s, it was very different for foster children in foster homes. I'm not sure what the experience is like today, but I was forced to do manual labor in many of the foster homes that I was in. And I've been like cleaning up in the yard, watching the other children, cleaning up the dishes and all that kind of stuff, laundry, whatever. And so it did teach me something that I thought was a good tool. It taught me how to work harder and try to impress people. So the more harder I worked, the more the foster parents left me alone. So it was a good experience and it was a bad experience, only because I was taken so far away from a culture and tradition that I needed to be with. And every time they took me in the foster home, I became almost as angry as I was from when they took me and put me in a residential school. They weren't sexually abusing me in there, but they were still taking my identity away from me. And I longed to hear the drums from my community. And my house was right across from one of the longhouses. So I could hear that drum sound every day in the morning and at night. And in foster homes, I didn't get to witness that. I did get to witness what I call love and care, because I watched the foster parents interact with their own children, and it gave me the idea what I was missing from my own home. So that's the only plus that I took away from being in a foster home, that it taught me responsibility, how to work hard to make ends meet. And I got to witness love and care when foster parents interacted with their own children and their own family. I had good and bad experience in foster homes, and I'm not saying anything against you. It's just that we're different generations, and not all the foster homes in 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s were the same. And new laws were created to change how people interacted with children. And by the 80s, it was bad if you were caught hitting children. So a lot changed since the 80s. So that's my experience with foster homes.
Thank you, Eddy. It's Roz Pringle. I'm the one that asked you the question. It's Roz Pringle, and I work with foster parents. So I'm not a foster parent myself, but I'm going to gather that you didn't. So none of the homes were Indigenous homes then. Is that right, that you stayed in?
None of the homes you stayed in were Indigenous?
No, they were non-Indigenous.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing your story. And it's good for us to know what kind of experience you had, so that going forward we can, help to make sure that, kids don't feel that way. So thank you very much, Haichika.
Thanks, Roz.
Jeff, question.
I do have a comment from an attendee. They say, bless you for sharing such a difficult story. No one in the world should have lived the nightmare that you and so many other children and their families have. I am shocked into silence while I try to imagine anyone hurting children or families. My hope for you and all other survivors and their families is that one day you will feel the love you so want to feel. Very many comments. Thank you so much. You have love, respect, and admiration. Oh, this is hard. You are a warrior and you should be proud. Sharing and enlightening everyone to these atrocities is long overdue. Your work is hard, but hopefully you can gain more peace and just know that you are loved.
Can I share something with everybody? No, me and Kristin have worked really hard over the past 6 years. And one of the goals that I have for the work that we do is that the effective residential school is recognized all across Canada. And because of that, that dedication and commitment to creating awareness across Canada, I have written to every single senator, every single MP in Ottawa, and every single MLA in British Columbia, and every single mayor in British Columbia, and I asked them to help me to commemorate the residential school experience, so we can honor all the survivors, the intergenerational survivors, and create a holiday to honor this experience. And I want every single survivor to feel safe, and I want every single intergenerational survivor to feel like they have a place that they can belong to. So I wrote to every single MP and senator with hopes that they will work together and to create a national holiday for September 30th, so that they will honor residential school survivors. And I'm sure many of you watched the 2-minute video, and there's a metaphor in there that I used about a river. Now there's an MP in New Brunswick or Fredericton. She quoted me on that, and she told the House of Commons that she talked about how I talked about I compared the residential school experience as a river where the river was contaminated with hate, pain, anger, and aggression, and that will always be stuck in that bad place until we clean it up. And she said, we as parliamentarians and government officials have to roll up our sleeve and work together to begin cleaning up that river. So all the work that me and Kristin do is now starting to take effect all across Canada. When you have 120 mayors from British Columbia writing to Justin Trudeau saying, you need to do this, you need to get on this. And then we have all the MLAs from Victoria also writing to Ottawa saying that we need to recognize September 30th. And we have Mayor Lisa Halps from Victoria also writing. We think that all the work we're doing is starting to pay off, and we're really grateful that people are starting to hear us, because really me and Kristin are just two people with really small voices, and we hope that these small voices that we have create giant ripple effects all across Canada, and people will start acknowledging the story of residential school. That's all I wanted to share with you. And you could probably learn more about us if you look up on the website that's on here. And Diane can give that to you later. And I will leave some of these pamphlets in here in case some of the folks from Victoria Foster Home would like to come pick some up. And we will leave some more here later. And we are really hopeful that COVID-19 will disappear this year, so we can have a live event, and we can continue to reach out to people all across Canada. Thank you.
I wondered if Jeffrey Cook wanted to say something. I noticed your hand went up a couple times, and just want a chance if you have anything to add.
Yeah, thanks. I know I came in late. I had another Zoom meeting before this one, so that's why I'm kind of late. Anyway, my name is Jeff Cook Yaslua. I'm from, I won't tell you where I'm from, but for obvious reasons. We do have 4 foster kids. And, you know, I did go to residential school for 13 years here for 13 years, I attended residential school. So, you know, my wife and I, you know, decided to take in foster kids because one of the main reasons is we didn't want to see the treatment given to those kids that we received when we were in residential school. So we've been foster parents off and on for 30 years. These last 10 years, we've had one family since they were babies, basically. So, you know, in essence, the family wasn't fit to raise them. You know, they're like Eddy had said, there's, you know, alcoholism in a family. There was abuse, physical abuse. There was no proper social interaction, and all what Eddy was talking about, we were never taught that. You know, I could verify, you know, what Eddy is saying is true, because, you know, to any of the 130 residential schools across Canada, they're all the same story, basically. You know, mistreatment, punishment, didn't teach us any life skills, you know, stuff like that. I always talk about my community where, you know, where there are a lot of social issues. You know, how do parents learn those social skills when all our kids were at residential school? How do they pass it on to their kids? The answer is they can't. They won't, because they were never taught themselves, or, you know, because during the school year, you look out in their community, there was no kids in your community, so there was no interaction between them. So that's, you know, people ask, why is there so many problems? That's one of the reasons, you know, because we were never taught the proper skills on how to raise a family. And how, I heard Eddy talk about love. You know, I'm still in that position where, you know, I got 3 children, and I can't, you know, it's difficult. I can say I love you, but there's no really meaning behind it, because, you know, we were never shown that or taught that. So thanks, Eddy, for sharing that. You know, I belong to a group, a Rotary group that's called the Rotary Mid-Island Reconciliation Group, and that's what we're meeting about. You know, how to make the broader community understand, you know what we've been through, in a good way, you know, not to be, you know, confrontational or anything, but to talk about our experience, you know, and how, you know, and I know the people that we talk to, they want to learn about, you know, what life was like, you know, and how can we improve the situation now. We all know what happened in the past, but let's move forward and how we can improve the situation. So that's what I want to say. And I came in when Eddy was talking about Matuli, and on the West Coast, it's called Matuni. That's where the Victoria area is called. Mm-hmm. So Matuni, it's called Matuni for the Nuu-chah-nulth people. Just thought I'd pass it on. Again, thanks, Eddy, for sharing your story. And, you know, like I said, you know, you went to Kuper Island, and, you know, I'm familiar with Kuper Island and Alert Bay and Ahousaht, all those places close by. You know, the school I went to, there was kids all the way from Prince Rupert down to, well, the Lower Mainland and interior. So anyway, I just want to share that. And I would have liked to jump in earlier, come in earlier, sorry. But like I said, we had another Zoom meeting. Okay, thank you very much.
Can I say something? After all the stuff that me and Kristin shared, we have no idea what your Kristin beliefs are, or where you stand in your beliefs with the church and government. Now, everything I shared with you today, I hope that you understand that we're not blaming any particular branch from any tree. Every single tree has a branch that has a different function, and there are priests and people that were hired to run the schools that did things on their own. It's not something that they were told to do by the church or the government. It's these single individuals. So we don't want you to feel guilty that your church did something bad to residential school survivors. It was just a few individuals within a place. So we hope that you don't take any umbrage to the things that we have to share with you today. And we hope you understand that we're not pointing fingers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddy, for sharing your story. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, McKenna, for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Cowichan Nation.